All right. Welcome to this week's Weekly Insight. My name is LaSusa. I'm the senior editor for InSight Crime, and I'm joined here by Héctor Silva, who is our senior investigator. Héctor, thanks for being with me again.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
Good, good. So today we wanted to talk about U.S. policy towards Latin America, specifically security policy and policies related to organized crime under the Trump administration. And we've written pretty extensively about this over the past couple of weeks. We have Héctor, who's there in D.C., so I think we'll be able to provide some pretty interesting perspectives on this. And I wanted to talk about U.S. foreign aid to Latin America first. We published two articles this week about that. One was published today, specifically about the Northern Triangle in Central America, and the other one was more broadly about planned cuts in foreign assistance to Latin America. So the bottom line is that the assistance that's planning, the planned cuts to the assistance are mostly for development initiatives, what people call soft side aid, and the cuts to the hard side aid, the military and security force funding are relatively small in comparison. So, Héctor, I was wondering if you could kind of give us your perspective on what that means, broadly speaking, that the administration and Congress appear to be shifting away from supporting soft side initiatives and towards more hard side funding for security in the region.
Yes, Mike. Well, first of all, as you said, I think this marks it's too early yet, but definitely, as we have written and in these pieces in InSight Crime, what this does, both some of the things that the executive, that the White House, the administration itself has said is going to do, and also the kind of marking that Congress did a couple of weeks ago with the foreign ops budget at Capitol Hill here in Washington. What they do is they give us a pretty clear idea of what the shifts are going to be in this administration compared to the Obama administration towards Latin America, and what trends we can expect in the next 4 years. Main things that could be said, one is what you said. I think it's pretty safe to say that both the administration and Congress are betting for going back to what's known as the hard approach, which is in the security issue, which is going back to the approach which takes aiding the military, aiding the police forces, focusing on interdiction of drug trafficking as the main pillar of foreign aid, versus the soft approach that you mentioned, which is, betting to development programs, social and economic development programs in poor communities or in need communities in the region. I think, during the Obama administration, those two approaches were kind of balanced, because it's not accurate to say that the Obama administration privileged the soft approach, but it put it in. It put it into the equation. The Bush administration before that was more of a hard approach to the Mexico, Central America, Colombia. Let's use the Mesoamerican region as a whole. So it was interdiction. It was fighting the gangs. It was fighting cartels. It was putting a lot of money into militaries, into police forces. With Obama came an approach, and in fact, the Alliance for Prosperity for the Northern Triangle, which is this program that former Vice President Biden put together with Guatemala, El Salvador, and Guatemala to tackle immigration, got in a lot of the soft approach with an important chunk of money dedicated to that. Developing programs, social economic developing programs. It seems what the Trump administration is doing now is taking that money off and going back to the other stuff, to privileging military approach, not so much the money that was funneled or channeled through USAID, for instance. So I think we're going back to those days.
Well, and you have a lot of experience in the Northern Triangle, like you mentioned, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. And the article that we did today actually focused specifically on what you were just talking about, which is the cuts in assistance to that region. So, like you mentioned, under Obama, Congress approved $750 million in funding that was relatively evenly balanced between sort of hard side and soft side assistance. And now, under Trump, the Congress has just approved in their most recent budget cuts to primarily the soft side of that package. So the funding as a whole is going to be reduced by about $95 million, and approximately 80 million of that 95 million is going to come out of the soft side aid. So, like I mentioned, you have plenty of experience in the Northern Triangle. What do you think could be some of the effects of these cuts?
Well, as I said, I think it's kind of early to. But listen, some things won't change, will not change, because again, the Obama administration did have, through the State Department and through the view and policies implemented from the State Department, an important piece of hard approach to this. I mean, and if you look at some of the officials that are calling the shots now in Washington, are officials that were there in the Obama administration, that were very important in drafting policy and implementing policy in Central America, for instance, in the Northern Triangle, or elsewhere. I'm talking, for instance, about Mr. Ambassador William Brownfield, who is the head of INL, and he was very important in the past administration in drafting policy and highlighting stuff and in communicating with U.S. officials in the ground in these countries to put forward, to move forward the policies and the execution of the money. The thing with the Obama administration is that Brownfield and the Brownfield types kind of shared the space with other officials that were more aligned to the soft side. What does this mean? Let's look at the Northern Triangle. One particular important policy has been, for instance, the fight against corruption. The money coming from the U.S. to fund, say, the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala, CICIG, that money has come from a different set of pockets. And probably in the next exercise and the next fiscal year, excuse me, some of those pockets are going to change, but the support for CICIG is going to be there. So the U.S. policy of supporting fight against corruption in Central America won't change. And Bill Brownfield, who was kind of an advocate for that in the past, is still going to be that. And if you look down south, things might change a bit. For instance, in Colombia, the approach towards Colombia during the peace process and the Obama administration, or even in the war against drugs and all the eradication policy, has been changing. It changed before Obama, but Obama maintained some sort of balance between soft and hard approach. Now, in that case, probably we're going to be seeing more insistence coming from Washington to Bogota to remain in the hard approach side of it. In terms of policy, Mike, in the Northern Triangle specifically, I will see that it's going to be the support towards anti-corruption efforts is going to continue. Congress has given us a hint of that. If you look at the marking they did in the budget for 2007, you see specific support, for instance, for the three fiscalias, the three attorney general offices in Central America, something that wasn't there before. A specific aid, specific packages, it's I think it's 11 million for Guatemala, for instance, Ministerio Público. So that's going to stay there. What you're going to be seeing less and less are probably prevention programs. In the case of poor communities or gang-plagued communities, those that were put forward from USAID, for instance, I think that's going to be the programs. Those are going to be the programs that are going to be hurt in this case.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think one of the main, themes of Donald Trump's campaign and also his presidency has been not just migration through the southern border of the U.S., most of which comes from Central America and Mexico, but also the issue of criminal organizations and drug trafficking also coming over the border. So we've reported quite a bit on some of the proposals that Trump has made. I'm talking specifically about his proposal to add thousands and thousands of new both Border Patrol agents and ICE immigration agents. And so we've talked a little bit about how this can potentially backfire on the Trump administration. It sounds great to put more people on the border. You would think that would stop immigration, rather undocumented immigration and illegal drug trafficking. But Border Patrol has long had a big problem with corruption, and this could actually end up exacerbating that problem and weakening security along the border. I don't know if you have anything that you want to add about that.
No, I basically think you're right. The piece that we wrote about that is pretty clear on that. I mean, yes, there's an intention in the way they're drawing and drafting these budgets or approving these budgets. And yes, if you look at what CBP is getting, the Customs and Border Patrol is getting in this new exercise, it's a little bit more from what they were getting before. And yes, there is the presidential promise, let's say, that they're going to put more agents on the ground. But so far, they have had a lot of difficulties filling those posts because not everybody wants to be a border patrolman so far. B, I was reading in our piece that 75% of those that made the test failed the polygraph exams. It's a recipe for disaster. If you look at what has already happened with CBP in the case of immigration, especially when the surge of unaccompanied minors happening back in 2014, there's been a lot of complaints of how agents in the ground handle these minors, for instance, or corruption problems or abuses problem. And at the end of the day, if you were able to fill 5,000 positions, which seems, like a lot, that's not going to be enough to cover and patrol the whole border. And as we have pointed out in InSight Crime, what this will provoke at the end of the day is this, because you could say that this is the U.S. version of mano dura approach in the border, right? So what this is going to do is going to enhance the muscle of the criminal smuggler organizations that down south will still be working to put illegally people, drugs, or anything in the U.S. border. It's not going to tackle the problem. Probably is going to cause you in the U.S. a new problem in the border.
Right, and so the other big proposal, I think that's perhaps even more famous than Trump's proposal to hire all these new immigration and border agents, is the infamous wall that he's planning to build along the southern border. Can you tell us a little bit about how you expect that to impact drug trafficking trends and criminal trends in the region?
Well, first of all, I mean, it's as we have said, budgets are blueprints, right? And they're, as we have written, they kind of they're policy papers. The budgets indicate you where you're setting your goals and how you're funding them, of course. Well, one thing that's clear is that the U.S. is funding the wall. Nobody else is. U.S. taxpayers are funding the wall. And if you look at the budget, that's clear. That's pretty clear. So it's going to be U.S. taxpayers' money that's going to be poured to the border. That's one thing that's now clearer than ever. And the second thing is, okay, what does that mean? What does that mean? Fencing more miles? Actually building concrete walls? Is the wall an idea? This idea of putting more agents down? That's been done before. Again, that's been done before, and it didn't solve anything. The Alliance for Prosperity that was put together in 2014 at least had something, and it was that plan, that policy paper and plan recognized that in order to tackle migration, you have to go down south. because I mean, you can put 5,000 agents in your border, but if you have, I don't know, hundreds of thousands coming each year, I mean, dozens of thousands will make it. You know, it's been happening for 3 decades now, and so what's the wall in actual terms? Fencing, more agents. What is it? So I do see a lot of rhetoric here, and then again, probably the creation of a new problem down there. And here's something interesting, Mike. One of the main elements of this rhetoric, for instance, lately has been MS-13. We've talked about this. You know, to make this wall to stop MS-13 members coming from the U.S. It's interesting that I was seeing the news. I was watching the news that I think it was yesterday that DHS announced that it had implemented the larger ICE did the larger operation ever against MS-13 with a number of raids. All they did, I think it was 14% of all the arrests that they made. 14% were alleged gang members in the U.S. Of those, some 70% were U.S. born. And the rest were coming from Central America. So MS-13, U.S. MS-13 problem is in great part here, in the U.S. already. Those are U.S. citizens, so you cannot deport them. So never mind the wall. It's not going to be a solution for that.
Well, yeah, and the other dynamic at play here. I mean, you have the proposal to beef up border security, to beef up immigration enforcement, to build this wall potentially, and then you also have the Trump administration apparently pressuring Mexico, as the Obama administration did, to do more to deport Central Americans from Mexico before they can reach the United States. There's also reports that the U.S. is going to encourage Mexico to carry out more eradication of opium poppies, which are a huge source of the heroin that's contributing to the opioid epidemic in the United States. So that's another part of their strategy, it seems, is to put more pressure on Mexico, ask Mexico to do more. I don't know if you have thoughts about how that might work out or not.
Well, I think that's really important. But then again, that's not a shift in policy. The Obama administration started with that. I mean, after 2014, it was the Obama administration, the one that actually worked with Mexico to have Mexico to deport more Central Americans. Probably the Trump administration, what they're willing or planning to do is to enhance that, and that's going to be to mark shifts in the immigration, but it won't stop it. It won't stop it. So, but then again, that's not a shift in policy, and I think it will have. If you look at the numbers and ICE and DHS statistics, it is yet not clear how that particular policy, in the case of Mexico increasing their deportations, impact the whole number of Central American illegal migrants coming into the U.S. The take is that it was not a big decrease in people overall coming to, because I insist, as far as the conditions that push migration from the Northern Triangle persist, migration will keep happening.
Yeah, well, and this kind of brings us back full circle, sort of. We've talked about potential reductions in soft side aid, particularly to Central America, but also throughout the region. We've talked about, putting more pressure on Mexico to continue an enforcement-centric approach, enforcement of migration, enforcement of drug eradication and interdiction. Again, here in the United States, there's plans to build the wall, increase border security and immigration enforcement. So all these things are hard side, or at least enforcement-centric approaches to problems of security and organized crime. And I think that we've been talking a lot about Mexico and Central America, but I think that applies probably more broadly to the region as well. And I just wondered if you have thoughts on that. I mean, like you've mentioned, the Obama administration folks in the Trump who have moved into the Trump administration, like John Kelly, the Homeland Security Secretary, like Bill Brownfield at the State Department. Those guys are probably making pretty key decisions. And it could be that there's some continuity in the policies between Obama and Trump due to that and other reasons. But what do you, in terms of the shifts, it does seem like we're seeing a shift away from trying to at least incorporate those soft side measures. And like it seems like we're seeing a shift towards focusing more on enforcement, security force capacity, and just sort of increasing the number of agents on the streets. Do you think that that's applicable more broadly than just in Mexico and Central America?
I think it's remained to be seen. For certain, that seems to be the path. That seems to be, from the indications that we are having in the form of how this first Trump budget has been drafted and has been approved or marked by both House's appropriations committees. It seems like that way for sure. And then again, if you look at what's happening within the administration, at the State Department, the officials that privileged the hard side of things are still there. And as I said, being in Washington in all the Obama years, what you had inside the State Department was kind of a balance. So you have the hardliners, because let's say the interdiction part of the drugs and war approach never faded, not even during the Obama administration. The hardline approach to MS-13 has been there always, in the conversations between Washington and all these countries. But what you had again was a approach that privileged again other kind of measures. For instance, supporting, as we talked about before, supporting prevention programs of violence, of youth violence. Successful ones, for instance, in Guatemala, in the outskirts of Guatemala City, you had a couple of, were those meaningful enough? That's another discussion. But you had that. In the case of El Salvador, you had USAID money in cash transfer programs aimed to prevent violence in gang-plagued communities. It was kind of a mix, but the document that marked the line in the second half of the Obama administration, or the second term of the Obama administration, which was the Alliance for Prosperity, was precisely a mix of that, And what came to that from that mainly was kind of the reinforcement of the idea that in order to address security, you had to address institutional health down there in the Northern Triangle specifically. So you had to put money there. Is that a hard approach or soft approach? Well, at least it's not just the interdiction soul-based approach that was the CARSI or the Merida Initiative theme. It was a different approach that really sent the Northern Triangle to a number of stuff that's happening now in Guatemala. We've written about this a lot. I don't think that's going to change. I think so far what you'll see in practical terms is the end, or at least they will almost finish, I guess, these prevention-oriented programs, these programs aimed at civil society or civilian population. I think that's we're going to be seeing less and less and less of that, and we're going to see more. But then again, we're going to see more of an approach that privileges the aid to the military. But then again, if you look at the budget carefully, that has come down too, in general terms. So we will have to see. What we have so far are hints, are kind of the idea of the blueprint, and if you put together that with the rhetoric, it seems like, yes, it's going to be hardline approach all over and during the whole period. But then again, these are huge machines. Border Patrol is a huge machine. It's a big difference in between what you're saying you will do and what you can accomplish in the ground. Then again, what the Peña Nieto Trump relationship is going to be. Is it going to be as smooth as the Obama Peña Nieto relation was? We don't know that yet. But definitely it's safe to say, Mike, that it seems like in terms of the budget, it's a step further than just mere rhetoric, and probably, yes, we're heading that way.
Right. Well, I think that's an important point that you brought up about these are just sort of initial signs. They do tell us something, but there is a lot that remains to be seen about the ultimate direction that policy takes. But you mentioned one thing about Obama and Peña Nieto's relationship compared to compared to Trump's and Peña Nieto's relationship, significantly more rocky, I would say, with Trump and Peña Nieto. So we got a question from one of our listeners asking us more broadly how we see the Trump administration interacting on policy discussions with partners in Latin America. Do you think that because of how controversial Trump is, because of the controversies about his approach and the criticisms of just him kind of as a leader, do you think that will impede cooperation on the part of Latin American countries with the Trump administration?
I think it's safe to say now that it's come to a slower point. I think it has to do with facts or things that, in bureaucratic terms, for instance, I'm talking to Central American diplomats here in Washington. It's not clear who the interlocutor is in the State Department, aside from Bill Brownfield, and because, there's a lot of empty positions there. So embassies now are talking more with Congress, with the Republican Congress than with the administration. So I think it's still in that side, in the side of what the relationship is, especially with countries that are not as strategical in Latin America to the U.S. as Mexico or Colombia. There's still some sort of land of confusion still. But I think that's about to change. And something we haven't talked about is we have talked about the budget, we have talked about the border, I've talked about the security side, a little bit about migration, but there's some other signs. For instance, what the Trump administration said this week or the week before about TPS for Haitians. The temporary protection status. So that could be huge. I mean, that's policy administered by the executive branch. It depends only on Trump and the White House whether that continues or not. And if it doesn't, if it is narrowed in some way, that could mean a huge lot difference. I don't see a whole conversation between Northern Triangle and Washington in that regard. Of course, and that has to do probably with what I'm saying about it's some sort of line of confusion still on who the interlocutors are up here. Of course, if you talk about President Santos in Colombia, that's a priority, and I guess the Trump administration is already marking its rhythm down in Bogota on how U.S. is going to handle the whole peace process down there. Same thing with Mexico, the whole wall thing. But then again, in Mexico, you have to look at, commerce, trade, all that. And probably it's going to be rougher, especially in the case of Mexico. In the case of Central America, one thing is safe to say. It's, in my view, for Secretary Tillerson, for President Trump, it's far way less important than the region so far than it was for the Obama administration. It was Vice President Biden, the second in command, driving that policy. Here, it's just not that important, and that is important for Central America, for instance.
Right. Yeah. Well, I definitely think we're definitely going to see differences based on countries, based on which political figures in the United States are lining up behind certain policies. You have splits even within the Republican Party. Rubio coming out and backing the Colombian peace process with Trump kind of wavering on it. So yeah, I think there's definitely going to be plenty to keep watching going forward, and we're obviously going to be covering it for our audience. So please keep an eye on our website for all that. But that's all we have time for today. Héctor, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Absolutely. And don't forget to tune in next Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern for the next discussion. Thank you. Bye.